Our next presentation deals with next generation loyalty in food retailing. Our presenter is the always entertaining Graeme McVie, Chief Business Development Officer for Precima. Graeme, the podium is yours.
Thank you, John, and thank you for inviting Precima back to participate in the LEAD virtual conference. We always enjoy the lineup of speakers that you have and the set of topics that you address during the virtual conference, and we're happy to be here as Precima to contribute our thoughts on the topic of next generation loyalty in food retail. So we had a viewpoint that loyalty had not been reviewed or refreshed in some time, and with all the dynamics and changes that were taking place in the market, we thought it was time to take a fresh look at this topic of loyalty. As a result of that thought process, we conducted a survey with 3,000 US shoppers and with over 200 retail professionals so that we could solicit the perspectives of both the shoppers and the retailers. And what we're going to share with you today are the outputs from that research, plus some case studies and frameworks for how to think about next generation loyalty. So we're going to talk about three different topics. The first one is looking at, is loyalty actually important these days, and how loyal are US shoppers to their food retailer? We're then going to turn over and think about how do you earn loyalty from a broader context, and how a food retailer is doing relative to that. And then we'll conclude with some thoughts on what is next generation loyalty, and give a different perspective on how to think about loyalty in general, and some case studies for examples of how that can actually manifest itself in reality. So as I said, we conducted a survey with 3,000 shoppers and 200 retail professionals, and we asked them this question. This was one of the questions we asked right off the top. This is an interactive poll, and what we thought would be interesting, given that we have an audience here that is knowledgeable about the food retailing space, we wanted to have your perspective on this. So if you could just vote on your screen here on this polling question, we'd love to get your perspective on how loyal do you believe shoppers are to their main food retailer. And we gave consumers the option of 5 responses, from not loyal on the low end through minimally loyal, moderately loyal, loyal, and very loyal. So we would love to get your thoughts on this question. You all are participants in this wonderful industry that we all work in, and it would be great to get your thoughts on this topic. And then once we have your thoughts, we'll share with you what the 3,000 consumers said from their responses as well. We have a good number of responses. If anybody else would like to vote, if you could vote just now, that'd be great. And then I will publish the responses that we received. Okay, I think we've got a good number of responses there. So let's push out the poll results here. So you can see here the response overwhelmingly is right in the middle, moderately loyal. There are a few more people said loyal than minimally loyal, and a few more people said very loyal than not loyal. So by my calculation, that probably means that the average response was just slightly over moderately loyal and not quite loyal. So that actually is consistent with what I was expecting before we actually conducted the survey. I thought it would be somewhere around about the middle of the pack. What we found was, I thought, very interesting. So I have 4 different responses to survey questions here. On the left-hand one is the answer to that question. We asked consumers, how loyal are you to your main food retailer? And I was very surprised at how loyal people believe themselves to be. Almost 80% of responses said they were either loyal or very loyal. And the average response overall on that sort of 1 through 5 scale was a little bit over 4. So that in some regards was surprising to me. I did not expect it to be that high. It was also actually kind of reassuring to me as well. It showed me that people do genuinely believe themselves to be loyal to their main food retailer. We didn't just ask that question, we asked a number of other questions. One of the other questions we asked was, do you have a preference for shopping only at one store if you could have all of your needs satisfied? And again, I was very pleasantly surprised. A very healthy, almost 60% did indicate they have a preference for shopping at one store. So I thought both of those data points were reassuring and positive for the food retailing space. But then things got a little bit more interesting, because then we started asking shoppers, what was your actual shopping behavior? And we asked them, how many stores do you typically shop at in a normal week? And I want to emphasize the fact we did ask in a normal week, because some people can be asked that question over the course of a month or a quarter or a year and give a very different answer. But we were looking at in a typical week. And only 19% said that they shopped at one store in a typical week. And then we asked them what percent of their weekly budget did they spend at their primary store. And only 7% said they spent between 90 and 100% at their primary store. So there seems to me to be a little bit of a disconnect there. And sometimes when things like this come along, researchers will say that there's a say-do gap. Consumers say one thing, but they do another. On one hand, there's a desire or an interest or a belief in being loyal and only wanting to shop at one store, but the actual behavior is very different. And when we asked that question about preference for shopping at one store, there was that qualifier that went along with it, which was if you could have all your needs satisfied. And throughout the course of the survey, it became clear from the responses that shoppers were saying that they do not have all of their needs satisfied by their main food retailer, and that leads to the fragmentation of their spend across multiple stores and the fragmentation of their budget across multiple stores. So in some regards, that's a very upbeat message. There's the desire and the willingness to be loyal and to shop at one store, but there's clearly expectations not being met, which is driving shoppers to shop at multiple stores. So that's sort of the consumer perspective. We also asked retailers, given all the changes that have been taking place in the industry over the last sort of 12 months, with the growth of e-commerce and obviously the rise of the millennial shopper, and then that wonderful story that came out about Amazon buying Whole Foods, we asked, how has the importance of loyalty changed within your company? And again, I was a little surprised at this, but I was very positively refreshed to see this, that over 75% of retailers stated that the importance of loyalty has increased to them from an internal perspective. So that was, again, an interesting finding from the research. Now, when we went through the research, one of the reasons we surveyed 3,000 shoppers was so that we could dissect the data along multiple different dimensions. And when we saw the data coming up about how loyal shoppers believed they were, we then looked at, well, what are the factors that are associated with that? We wondered, is it the baby boomer generation or the millennials? Is it urban shoppers versus suburban or rural? Was it income level? Was it family size? We looked at a lot of different factors, and there were only two that really sort of stood out. The first one was where a retailer actually had the loyalty program. So you can see here on the left-hand chart, 28% of consumers stated they were very loyal. But when it came to shoppers that shopped with a retailer that had a loyalty program, that number jumped to 32%, and when it came to shoppers that shopped at a retailer that did not have a loyalty program, that dropped down to 24%. Now, we're not saying that's a causation, that was a correlation. So it's not that because you have a loyalty program you have more loyal shoppers. It could also be that more loyal shoppers just frequent grocery stores that have loyalty programs. The other one was shown on here on the right-hand side. We actually asked shoppers which grocery store do you shop at for your main grocery store, and where we had a large enough sample size for the responses by retailer, we then went and looked to see if that retailer's sales had increased or declined. And again, there was a slight difference here in the response from the consumers who shopped at retailers that grew versus retailers that declined. And this really kind of got to some of the nuances we were trying to understand, which is how important is the loyalty program overall to earning loyalty versus is it possible to earn loyalty even for retailers that don't have a loyalty card or a loyalty program? And one of the interesting insights on the chart on the right, when we did break it out by not just did sales grow or decline, but did the retailer have a loyalty card or not, there were retailers who were growing sales and did not have a loyalty card or program who did get higher loyalty ratings from shoppers. So that sort of seemed to indicate to us that even if you don't have a loyalty card or a program, it is still possible to earn the loyalty of your shoppers just by being a good retailer that executes really well across multiple dimensions, which manifests itself in growing sales rather than declining sales. So again,
we have a question that came in, Graeme. We have a question just came in regarding this.
Okay.
Do Amazon programs are considered loyalty programs, such as, for example, the subscribe and save?
Oh, that is a fabulous question, and you're actually preempting one of the topics we were going to get to during the presentation. Our viewpoint is that loyalty programs can be defined more broadly than they are today. From our viewpoint, a loyalty program has to satisfy two criteria. One is it has to offer a differentiated standalone value to the consumer, and the second is it has to have a unique customer identifier that you can attach to a transaction so you can understand that unique customer's behavior. If you take that definition, you can actually have a broader viewpoint of what constitutes a loyalty program. And we actually did some secondary research. We looked at the 50 largest food-oriented retailers in the U.S., and out of those 50, 30 of those 50, so 60%, had what you would define as a traditional loyalty program, which is a card that you show at the register. There were another 10, though, that would qualify as having a loyalty program that would not qualify as a traditional card-based program, but would meet that new definition of a standalone value proposition with a unique customer identifier, which is exactly what the Amazon program does meet those criteria. So if you take that into account, you end up with 80% of retailers that would have a loyalty program by that definition. So I think that is a fantastic point that the question got to, and it was definitely a key part of the research, and it actually ties in perfectly to this next slide. So this slide actually looks at that topic of loyalty programs. So because we asked so many consumers and we could break out the results by the consumer that was shopped, we could then look at what type of loyalty program the retailer had or whether they didn't have a loyalty program. And what we found was when we asked shoppers how important is the loyalty program to your selection of your grocery store, on average the response was 53% of shoppers overall said it was important to their selection of a grocery store, but there was huge variability in that response. So when you actually break it out by by retail program, you can actually see here that for the retailer at the top there, if you add that 25% onto the average of 53, actually 78% of those shoppers that shopped at that retailer said the loyalty program was important to choosing that retailer. And that was up there along with some of the other factors like price and quality and service. And as you go down the list, obviously a deep discounter that doesn't have a loyalty program, it's a much lower percentage of consumers said the loyalty program was important or not to their choice of the store. But when you actually look at what was driving some of those programs at the top, those were more of those innovative loyalty programs. So the Amazon program is a great example of that because it does include differentiated types of values associated with the program. And if you look at some of those top ones, things like personalization, additional services, additional access to programs in the store, things like home delivery or discounted home delivery were also included in there. And then some in the middle there are more your traditional two-tier price discount programs that actually do not have any additional value associated with them. So it's a fascinating insight that if you actually do have a loyalty program and you're innovative and differentiated, it can actually be an important driver for traffic to your stores.
We have a question that came in, Graeme, regarding this slide. Why do you think some shoppers value loyalty programs and some don't?
I think a lot of it has to do with, I think there are some shoppers that just naturally gravitate towards the concept of loyalty programs, just as there are some shoppers that naturally don't gravitate towards it. So I think that is an element. There's a small portion of consumers that fall into each of those buckets, but I think a larger portion of it is to do with what is the value of the program itself. And during the research, we actually did ask a lot of questions about the value of the loyalty program and what was it that drove the value. So some of the factors that come out were the ability to earn rewards very quickly, the ability to get differentiated services, feeling like the retailer actually was using the loyalty program to understand customer needs and then give back to the customer value based on that data sharing. Largely, a lot of the responses came back through things like personalization. I actually did some analysis last holiday season. I looked at all the emails I received from retailers in the month of December, and I looked at how many I received and how many of those were personalized versus not personalized. And Amazon was a great example of the emails that I got from Amazon. Like over 90% of them were personalized and were relevant. There were other retailers I received from were personalized but not relevant, and there were some retailers that were not personalized at all. So I think a lot of it is how the program is designed and what the retailer does with the program to give value back to the consumer. Linda, if you could just move me along to the next slide, that'd be great. So we're now going to move on to the next section of the presentation, which is talking about how you actually earn loyalty. So we're going to have another polling question here. So Linda, if you can push out that polling question, that would be great. So the next polling question was trying to get at, is it possible to earn loyalty across multiple components of a retailer's value proposition? So what we're looking at here is trying to understand, from your perspective, which of the following do you believe is most important to earning shopper loyalty across a retailer's shopper base? And you can see that we're asking for you to select one of these, and normally you would obviously select a multitude of these different offerings. But here we're looking at just asking you to select one of these. So if you could select one of these, we've got core merchandising elements, and here we're talking about things like price, promotion, quality, and breadth of assortment. The next one is core shopper experience options. So here we're looking at things like short checkout lines, good service, clean stores, and so on. And then we're looking at the loyalty program, the e-commerce offering, either click and collect or home delivery. And then the last one is emerging offerings, so things like personalized offers, a good website, and smartphone app, and so on. So we're being a little bit unfair to you because we're forcing you to select from one of these. We're not allowing you to select multiple of these. So if you could just select which one you think is relevant, and then once we have that, then we will we'll push the results out. So we did ask this for shoppers, and we're going to compare your responses. Now we gave shoppers a lot of different options here, rather than just the 5 that we've given you here. So we're looking at what responses we can get from you here, and Linda, if we could publish the results here. And John, can I ask you just to review the results here? I can't
Sure.
see the screen just now, so if you could just review the results here.
Sure. It looks like the response that received the most votes is core shopper experience, followed by a tie between core merchandising elements and a loyalty program. Lagging was an e-commerce offering, and nobody picked emerging offerings.
Oh, excellent. Okay, so yeah, I was kind of expecting that response as well. So Linda, if we can go to the next slide. This next slide here shows the responses that we received. And you can see here we've color-coded them. So the ones in blue are your core merchandising elements, so quality of products, in-store prices, which come out as the top 2. And the green there, you can see the core shopper experience elements, so clean stores and good store locations, customer service, short checkout lines. Then we have a couple more on the core merchandising elements with in-store promotions, national brands, and then we go a store layout and a few more of the core merchandising. And then loyalty programs comes fairly low down the list. And then after that, we've got some of the emerging offerings, whether it's the personalized offers or e-commerce or best-in-class website or best-in-class smartphone. So this one was interesting to me that some of those emerging elements were so lowly ranked. It didn't surprise me on some of the higher ones, but when we dug into the data in a little bit more detail, what we were typically finding was consumers and shoppers now just expect retailers to deliver on those core merchandising, core shopper experience elements. So it's not always possible to differentiate on those, but if you don't deliver a good experience around those, then consumers will be less than satisfied. Whereas for some of the elements further down the list, although those weren't as highly ranked, it was actually possible for the retailer to differentiate on those. And then we also cut that data by demographic. So, Linda, if we can go to the next slide, you can see here on this next slide, we've actually broken out those emerging elements by millennials and baby boomers. And you can actually see there's a relatively significant difference here in that the millennials are actually starting to prefer and value some of those emerging offerings more so than the baby boomers. So this throws up a little bit of an interesting situation for retailers in that they have to make sure they're still continuing to deliver on those core merchandising and shopper experience components for the baby boomers, but they also need to make sure they're laying the foundation for the future, for when the millennials are going to become the largest and most important part of their shopper base. So it's really important that they do both of those, which is not always easy. So at this point, let's move to the next slide, Linda. We've got another polling question here. So we're going to ask for your participation again. And here we're looking at not the elements of the value proposition, but here we're looking at the different departments within the retailer store. So here we're looking at what do you think. Again, we're being a little bit unfair because we're asking you just to select one here. But we're asking which of the following departments and categories do you believe is most important to earn shopper loyalty across a retailer's shopper base? So you can see here we've given you, again, 5 different options. So we've got the fresh department, so your meat, seafood, fruits, vegetables, dairy, that side of the store. Then we've got center store food departments. So here we're looking at grocery, the soup, the cookies, the soda, and so on, the frozen department. So center store food. Then we're looking at center store non-food. So we're looking at home and health and beauty care, home products, general merchandise. And then we're asking about a couple of newer emerging departments. So prepared meals or meal kits is the next option. And then the final one we've got here is the in-store dining options. So we'll give you just a second to vote on that. So you can let us know if you think it's possible to earn shopper loyalty across one of those departments more than those different departments. We'll just give you a second to go through that. And then, John, if I can ask you just to keep track of how many votes we've had coming in there.
Sure.
And then if you can just push that out.
Okay, I can tell you right now the big winner is fresh departments. Overwhelmingly was the choice of our voters. Nobody chose in-store dining, prepared meals, center store non-food, a couple of votes, few more for center store food, but it was 80% of the vote was for fresh departments.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, so one of the reasons we actually asked this question, John, was because we had a hypothesis that shoppers were now not necessarily becoming loyal to a store, but they were becoming loyal to a department within a store and starting to fragment their spend, where maybe they would go to a Whole Foods for some of the fresh departments, and maybe they'd go to some of the big box guys for some of the health and beauty care or home products, and maybe they would go to center store grocery for the traditional main retailer. So if we can go to the next slide, Linda. Here was the response that we received back. And I wasn't overly surprised that shoppers said fresh fruit and veg was the number one. But I was somewhat surprised that center store grocery was the number two. We then have another couple of fresh departments followed by center store food again with frozen. And then you can see we start getting into some of the center store non-foods like home goods and HBC and then general merchandise. But the emerging ones of prepared meals and meal kits were not there, were not ranked very highly. They were much more lowly ranked on this one. So
and a question came in regarding that, Graeme, pointing out what you just said. These new departments are ranked low. Should retailers not focus on them?
Oh, that is a very good question. So, yeah, if we actually go to the next slide, Lynn, if we can go to that next one, this sort of gives an indication of why they should or should not focus on that. So, again, it's one of these things where I think retailers are in that situation where they're going to have to understand how to satisfy the needs of the baby boomers who overwhelmingly selected the fresh categories and the center store food over the emerging categories. But the millennials are much more interested in some of these emerging categories. So they're going to have to make sure that they can do a good job with those fresh and center store food categories, at the same time making sure they satisfy the needs of the millennials, because those are going to become the most important part of their business going forward. So if we go to the next slide, Linda. So here, this was another interesting point that came out of the research. We did actually ask people, do you like a lot of options in certain categories? And then we broke it out by generations. And what we found was the older shoppers value a lot of options in the assortment and fresh categories, whereas the younger generations are actually looking for more options in home products and health and beauty care. And I don't know about anybody else, but I personally haven't changed the toothpaste that I bought, other than some value-added attributes. I still buy the same brand of toothpaste I bought when I first started shopping for myself. Whereas the younger generation, I think, are still trying to find some of the brand loyalty. The interesting thing about this, though, was that the younger generations are more willing than the older generations to purchase online, especially in some of those areas where we are looking at home products and health and beauty care. So we can move to the next section here. So now we're going to look at what is next generation loyalty, and we're going to take a fresh look at the topic of next generation loyalty. So Linda, if we go to the next slide. So loyalty, it's really important to understand, loyalty is not a card or a program or even an initiative. Loyalty has to be earned by consistently satisfying the needs of shoppers. And if retailers and manufacturers can do that successfully, then they have a much greater chance of earning the loyalty of consumers and being successful on a consistent basis. But that requires retailers to realize two objectives. Firstly, you need to understand those needs on a granular, timely, and frequent basis, and then you need to connect it to consistently executing actions, because that's the only way you actually satisfy the customer needs, is by taking an action. So if we go to the next slide, Linda, here's our perspective on this topic of next generation loyalty. So we think loyalty needs to be viewed in three dimensions. The first one is loyalty as a strategy. The second one is loyalty as an outcome of daily decision making, and the final one is loyalty as a program. So what do we mean by loyalty as a strategy? Well, if we go to the next slide, Linda, when we're talking about loyalty as a strategy, these are some of the big strategic decisions that retailers have to make when they're thinking about aligning their resources with customer needs. And one of the piece of research we identified was, what is your preferred place for purchase of the following products? And you can see here, the overwhelming majority of shoppers still want to shop in stores, and especially when it comes to some of those fresh departments. But as you move down the list and get into some of those non-food center store categories, there is a higher preference to purchase those online. So this is one of these situations. If you've got shoppers that are interested in shopping online, then you obviously need to think about an e-commerce offering as a retailer. And if you don't have an e-commerce offering, then you're going to exclude yourself from some customers. And when we looked at the data in a little bit more detail, there were some segments of shoppers that were migrating the vast majority of their purchases online, but that was a relatively small segment of the shopper universe. However, there was a much larger segment of the shopper universe that was starting to migrate a disproportionate amount of their spend online in specific categories. So from a strategic perspective, when you're trying to grow your business, it's usually a good idea to compete in a growing market and not in a shrinking market. So if you want to capture that growth opportunity, you need to make sure you have an e-commerce offering. So that's a major strategic decision. If we go to the next slide, here's another example of loyalty as a strategy. You need to identify what are the largest customer-driven opportunities to grow your business. And here, it's kind of a share of wallet type analysis that we undertake, where we analyze each individual customer by category and understand what's their current spend and what should their potential spend be. And one simple example of that is if someone's coming into a store and shopping 10 or 12 or 15 aisles in the store, but they're not shopping the laundry aisle, then clearly they're having their needs satisfied for the laundry products in some other form or fashion at some other retailer. So if you aggregate that up, you can aggregate it up by customer or by store, or in this instance by category, and you can see here where your biggest opportunities to grow, and again you can allocate resources to pursue those growth opportunities. So there's a couple of examples of loyalty as a strategy. We move on to loyalty as an outcome of daily decisions. Loyalty, we look here at the first slide at pricing. There's always a lot of headlines in the press about pricing decisions and about investments in pricing. I think I looked just in the second half of last year, and there were at least 4 or 5 major U.S. retailers who are making public statements of investing tens and hundreds of millions of dollars in improving price perception. Well, you really should be looking at how you do that by rewarding your loyal customers. And if you break out the volume change and the price elasticity by customer segment, you can actually make intelligent decisions about investing in lower prices. And I just included an example here at the item level, but this can also be done across the total store if you take a total store price optimization approach, and you can see there are some categories where you should be investing in lower prices because consumers value low prices there, and other categories where they do not value low prices. It's about quality or convenience or availability or brand loyalty. If we go to the next one, Linda, here's another example. This is personalized pricing. There's a lot of talk about personalization in the marketplace. I oftentimes find the personalization is focused on the items that are offered and not the pricing. Well, if you actually break down the price elasticity by customer, you can actually understand what's the right price to put on the shelf that will satisfy the majority of customers. And then for customers that are interested in a lower price, you can actually identify what that lower price is and then deliver a personalized price to them via email or a smartphone app or even via paper if that would be your preference. So those are some examples of loyalty as a daily outcome of daily decisions on pricing. If we move to the next slide, Linda, we'll now turn our attention to promotions. There's a lot of great analysis out there. Nielsen did a great study a couple of years ago where they analyzed, I think it was over 1 million different trade promotions, and found out that there were roughly, I think they said about 30% of trade promotions had no meaningful incremental lift. There was about another 30%, I think, that had incremental lift but were not a positive ROI, and then the remaining 40 or so percent performed pretty well on both of those dimensions. Well, not only is it important to understand is a promotion performing overall and delivering a positive lift and ROI, but it should also factor into the equation, are my loyal customers valuing these promotions? And there's two parts. That one is the items that are being promoted. You should promote the items that are valued by loyal customers rather than cherry pickers. And the other one is you should tailor the promotion mechanics or the discount depth to your loyal customers. And I've just shown one example on here where you can see that the Keurig K-Cups for this particular retailer that we worked with were valued very highly by loyal customers. The Starbucks ones were valued by both loyal customers and overall. Folgers did a good job overall. And then the private label option was not being valued very highly, so they shouldn't really continue. You should fix those or stop those promotions. So that's loyalty as an outcome on the promotion side. On the assortment side, again, it's important to understand how unique is each item in the assortment and how valuable is it to shoppers on the shelf. And we oftentimes will look at two different components here. On the vertical axis here, you can see what's called true item value. So we take into account demand transfer and halo and item uniqueness. And then on the horizontal axis, we can look at the item importance to loyal or best customers. And anything that has high true item value and is very unique and appeals to loyal customers should be considered core items. And then anything that's a delist opportunity is in that lower left-hand quadrant and should be considered for delisting and replaced with items that are more unique and more valued by loyal customers. So that's assortment. If we move to the next one, personalized marketing does get a lot of press these days and a lot of attention. We think there's two important parts to it. One is you have to identify the offers for each customer that drive both response and incremental sales. Oftentimes we'll see personalized offers do a good job on the response side, but not necessarily on the incremental sales side. So you need to get the right mix of offers by customer. So you have to create what we call a total store offer bank. And then the second component is you then need to put those together in compelling campaigns for each individual customer, so that each customer gets the right number of thank you offers, the right number of cross-sell and upsell offers, brand objectives are satisfied, and basket builder and trip frequency offers are in there, and that requires an offer optimization engine. If you do that, you can actually drive both response and incremental sales, and you can do it at a scalable level. And this is really where suppliers need to come to the table and collaborate with the retailers around this topic, because while suppliers are very well versed in how to work with retailers on trade promotions, on the personalized marketing side, those components tend to be a little bit more disconnected. And that brings us, Linda, to the next slide. Loyalty as an outcome of daily decisions around supplier collaboration. There's a huge opportunity for retailers and suppliers to collaborate more effectively around shoppers and shopper needs, and deliver a triple win for the shopper, the retailer, and the supplier. And we typically look at this in two buckets. One is how is my business performing? So suppliers and retailers are always interested in, am I performing or underperforming, and what might be causing that underperformance, and how might I take action to solve that? This is a great opportunity to collaborate around those sorts of topics. And then the second one is how can they most effectively grow the business? So retailers and manufacturers can come together around some of those daily decisions that we just mentioned, around promotion, assortment, even distribution, supply chain can come into it. Shopper marketing is a big opportunity, and then from a customer segment perspective, manufacturers have a lot of great consumer research. Manufacturers can bring that and share that with the retailer. The retailers have their specific shopper insights from their particular shoppers in their stores, and there's a good opportunity to collaborate effectively around those topics as well. So that's loyalty as an outcome of daily decisions. So Linda, if we move to the next slide, this is the final element. We can't forget about loyalty as a program. It is an important part of it. And as we mentioned earlier in this session, there are two components to it. One is, can we actually enhance the standalone value proposition of the loyalty program itself? So you need to assess how is the loyalty program performing for both the shopper and for the retailer, and then how can that program be enhanced? And there's sort of three buckets of focus areas here. One is around sort of funding levels. How do you earn or redeem? So what's the dividend? So there's a financial component to it. Then there's how's the program sort of structured? How much is in the base program versus how much is variable? What are the hard and soft benefits? What are the overt and covert offerings? And then finally, is there a customer or product focus of the loyalty program? And then on the right-hand side, we oftentimes see people have loyalty programs, but they don't leverage the loyalty data across the organization to enhance next-generation loyalty, and that's a big missed opportunity from our standpoint. There's lots of opportunities to grow the business using that loyalty business and be more intelligent and sophisticated about it. So Linda, if we go to the next slide, our viewpoint is that loyalty in 3D is a great opportunity to deliver differentiated and sustainable results through enhancing the loyalty program, personalizing marketing, becoming more shopper-centric in merchandising, and then having shopper-driven supplier collaboration. And if you wrap all of that in a loyalty strategy, then you can really drive the value to the high end of the ranges that we show there on this slide. So I just have one last slide here, Linda. If we go to the last one, I just want to leave you with some key takeaways. So one of the key takeaways is that loyalty has to be earned by consistently satisfying shopper needs better than the competition. It's about more than a card or a program. Loyalty can be earned in multiple ways across all elements of the value proposition and across all different departments. Different generations have different needs. You need to meet the needs of today but lay foundations for future shopper needs. And then it's really important to arm associates on both the retail and the CPG side of the business with the data insights and tools so they can consistently make shopper-centric decisions to earn loyalty. So that was all that I had that I wanted to share with you today. I wanted to hand it back over to John and see if there might be any questions that have come in.
Sure. Question, Whole Foods ended its rewards program. you want to comment on that, and what do you see replacing it?
Yeah, I always felt like Whole Foods had a sort of tepid approach to the loyalty program. They tried a couple of one and two store pilots. Then they rolled out their personalized offers to try and get engagement through their smartphone app. It always felt to me like they were just trying to drive more engagement through their smartphone app. It didn't feel to me like a wholehearted commitment to a loyalty program. And I'm actually not surprised that they discontinued it with the Amazon situation. Obviously, Amazon has their Prime program, and Amazon, I mean, if you look at the Prime program, it's an exceptionally well-run program. The fact that they've persuaded over 100 million people to actually pay almost $100 per person. I mean, that's just an obscene amount of money that people are willing to pay to participate. And Amazon gives them a lot of value back, not just in traditional two-tier price discounting, but through the Prime program and the 2-day free delivery and all the free downloads and streams you get, as well as the other valuable components to it. And on top of that, Amazon leverages all of that data, and they have a fantastic customer analytics solution, and they do a really good job with personalization and offer engine recommendations through the website. So it doesn't surprise me that Whole Foods discontinued that after Amazon purchased them, and I think you'll probably see Amazon's extremely developed capabilities come to bear, and you'll see an evolved, a new approach to loyalty at Whole Foods, driven largely by the Amazon mindset.
Okay, thank you, Graeme. We've come to the end, and on the screen you'll see several white papers and thought leadership pieces that are available on Precima.com. So you might want to check that out to continue the thought process on this very interesting topic. I learned a lot, and I thought I knew everything, Graeme, so thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting us here today, John.
And if you want to reach Graeme, his contact information is on the screen, email and phone, and follow him on Twitter at Graeme McVie. Okay,